Welcome to episode 14 of Stucky's Travels. I'm by myself again this time because I'm continuing south from Gettysburg to Washington, D.C. So from Warren County, Indiana, it's about an 11-hour drive if you go straight to D.C. As I talked about in the previous episode, if you go to Gettysburg, it's about 10 hours. And then you're going to have at least an hour and a half, if not 2 hours, depending on traffic, to get yourself into D.C. So I'm going to be breaking Washington, D.C. up into sections that you could do in a half a day or day, and they'll probably end up being 3 parts to the Washington, D.C. So the first part is going to cover the National Cathedral, the zoo, the Naval Observatory, Woodrow Wilson House, and the embassies. And you can see that I've zoomed in on the map, but if you were to look a zoomed out view, we're going to be covering kind of the northwest section of the Washington, D.C. area during this slideshow. So the Washington National Cathedral is totally amazing. It's $11 per adult, $7 per student. You can walk around the outside. Truly appreciate the amazing architecture. There was a big earthquake that happened in, I believe, 2011. It did a lot of damage to the cathedral. Did damage to other buildings in DC, but with the other buildings in DC, they were able to get government assistance on helping with the repairs, like the Washington Monument, for example. But the church is a church, so separation of church and state. All of the repair work is reliant upon private donations. So the entry fee that you pay is important to not only keep the church running, but also to work on some of those repairs. And so there's all sorts of gargoyles outside that you can see. If you take binoculars with you, you can get a closer view of these. You can take an elevator up to, I believe, the 7th floor and sort of look out the windows and have a good view of some of the really cool stone carvings. It's a really beautiful building inside. Helen Keller is amongst one of many people. Her and her helper, Annie Sullivan, are buried in the cathedral. They have Braille there. You can see how many people have rubbed their hands over the Braille. Another famous person buried in the cathedral would be President Woodrow Wilson. It's the only president buried in Washington, D.C. Arlington National Cemetery is not in Washington, D.C. It's in Arlington, Virginia. So the only president buried in D.C. is Woodrow Wilson. So inside there's amazing stained glass windows, different times of day. It looks very different. So depending on the time of day you go there, if you go year after year, it's going to look different each time. But the sun coming through, reflecting onto the stone walls. This is the rose window on the left. I believe there's over 10,000 pieces of glass. So just a lot of beautiful windows. One of the famous ones is the, is the space window on the right. They call it the space window because if you'll look in the center section, there's a smaller circle within the black looking circle. That is actually a piece of rock from the moon. Michael Collins, who was on Apollo 11 mission, was a student, an alumni from St. Albans Academy School, which is a private all-boys school on the grounds of the National Cathedral. He went to school there, so he brought back a moon rock for the cathedral. You can see how huge it is, over 1/10 of a mile long inside. Truly amazing. The intricate stone carving as well as the intricate wood carvings all throughout the building. The pictures really don't do it justice. Oftentimes people will ask, why are we going to a church? And then we step inside and they say, I know why you took us on a tour of the church. So much more history and information to learn about it. The National Zoo is the next place. It is free to get into the National Zoo. The highlight of the National Zoo is the giant pandas. So we only spend, when I go, only spend about an hour, hour and a half at the zoo. Probably about an hour, hour and a half at the National Cathedral as well. Because you can see elephants and other zoo animals at your local zoos at home. But what you can't see in every city would be the giant pandas. So checking out the giant pandas is definitely worth the visit to the zoo. It's run by the Smithsonian Institute. They have an ape house, which has a beehive actually painted on the outside, which is a really cool mural inside there's a bunch of orangutans and gorillas, so it's fun to watch them. So as you leave either the zoo or the cathedral, you're going to head towards the city. And in doing so, you're going to pass this circular shaped lot, which is the U.S. Naval Observatory. The Vice President of the United States lives at the Naval Observatory, but it still is an active observatory that's a working place. And another thing that's at that location is the master clock. So all clocks, like your cell phone clock, for example, are set to this clock. So as you drive by, if you have a watch that you want to make sure is exactly the right time, this is the spot to set your watch to. Pretty close to the Naval Observatory is the Woodrow Wilson House. So if you're really into presidential history, or if you like Woodrow Wilson, you can visit the Woodrow Wilson House. It is $15 for adults, $10 for students. That's not something that we take our students to, but if you have an interest in presidential history, you might want to make a stop there. Next, you're going to drive down Massachusetts Avenue along what we call Embassy Row. And countries have embassies in the United States, in the capital, like the United States has embassies in other world capitals, and it's where business is conducted. There are ambassadors of those countries who stay there and have offices there, and sometimes they even have where you can go into the embassies for a tour. There's many, many, many embassies, and you can look for the flag and the name of the embassy on the outside of the building. This area used to be called Millionaires Row. There were people who had these beautiful mansions for their families' homes, sometimes even their second or third home. Maybe they had a home in New York or Philadelphia, and they had another home here. Well, when the Great Depression happened, it no longer made sense to keep multiple houses, so a lot of people sold those houses, and eventually different countries bought all of those homes as embassies. So that is kind of the northern part of the city. As you're coming into DC, my recommendation would be to spend the morning in Gettysburg. If you're really into military history, maybe spend the evening when you arrive at Gettysburg, and then the next morning, and then get yourself to the cathedral and zoo by lunchtime, and you could finish off your day with those spots. So here's some other spots just south of those locations. So we're north of what we call the National Mall area, which you can see as the green section along the very bottom of the screen. But there are several spots that are north of that that you'll want to see. Now on the map, every place that's written in blue that's marked with an M next to it is a metro station. So it makes a lot of sense to abandon your car at some point and travel on foot or use the metro. If you want to have an expensive trip to Washington, D.C., you can have a hotel that's in this picture area, but it's likely going to cost you $300 a night. But you can stay outside of this area for $75 to $100 a night in very nice hotels, and then just take the metro into the city each day, or drive in early and try to find a spot. I recommend timing your trip so that you're actually in DC on the weekend. That way the people who are working in DC aren't carpooling at the same time as you. Or if you can time it where you're getting into the city when other people are leaving the city. Like if you came in on a Friday afternoon, for example, and did the cathedral and the zoo, that would be perfect. Then you could have the next 2 days of not very many people in downtown DC for you to explore. So on the furthest west side of this frame is Theodore Roosevelt National Memorial. Then we have the Kennedy Center for Performing Arts, the White House and White House Visitor Center, Ford Theater, and the National Portrait Gallery. So Roosevelt Island oftentimes gets overlooked. For one thing, it's very hard for a bus to park in this parking lot to get turned around, so most tour groups never go here. There's free parking, there's typically spots available. You walk across a bridge that goes over the Potomac River and onto this island. Roosevelt was a big outdoorsman, so they thought that the best place to make a memorial for him would be on this little island. So there's trails with primitive toilets. and this nice statue and some just neat things to see. Good views of Georgetown and looking across the Potomac at some of the monuments and memorials. Next spot was the Kennedy Center for Performing Arts. This is a bust of Kennedy made by a famous artist. They oftentimes call this the bubblegum method because it looks like it's been chewed up and then stuck onto the face, but it is a very famous piece of artwork that's there. It's probably close to 8 feet tall. The Kennedy Center has the Hall of Nations and the Hall of States. So in those long corridors, you can see the flags of all the countries. In the other corridor, you can see the flag of all the states. I should say not the flags of all the countries, but all the countries that we have a good relationship with. So countries that we've had struggles with in the past do not have a flag in this hall. The top right picture is showing a display of dresses that happen to be there. At different times when you go, those halls will have some sort of exhibit. So this time it happened to be handmade, kind of like fancy bridal dresses from around the world. There's the foyer, the Great Hall, which has free concerts at 6 o'clock every night on the Millennium Stage. You can look on their website to see what the concert's going to be for that night. Is one of the longest rooms in the entire world. You could lay the Washington Monument on its side in this room and still have extra space. You are also allowed to go on the roof of the Kennedy Center. Again, it's free to enter. If you want to go to a show besides the Millennium Stage, it is going to cost, and probably a lot of money depending on what the performance is. You might find a ticket for $50, $75, $100, $200. Depending on if it's a musical or an opera, orchestra, whatever the case might be. But the Millennium Stage is always interesting. Those concerts last about an hour to an hour and a half. You're allowed to go up on the roof for free. You can take the elevator up to the terrace level. Really great views. You can see the National Cathedral in the distance, the spires of Georgetown University, the Potomac River, Roosevelt Island, and then all of the different monuments and memorials. You can look across if you know where Arlington Cemetery is, and you can actually see the eternal flame at Kennedy's grave from the Kennedy Center. Next, the White House. So this is the Lafayette Park side. This is the side that you typically don't see like on the news, but this is the side that you can get closer to. So this is where most tourists are going to go for their pictures. There's always a police presence. You can apply for a permit if you want to protest for something at this spot. The other side is the Oval Office side. This is the side where you typically see when you're watching the news, or the side that the helicopter would land on. This is the side that has like the gardens, the beehives, when the Obamas lived there, the playground, that sort of thing on the Oval Office side. So this is one of the protesters. This protester started protesting there a very long time ago, and the rules have changed now about needing to have a permit, but this protester has been grandfathered in, so as long as someone is manning this area 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, they're allowed to stay. The police are watching. If they ever leave this post, this will all be torn down, and then they would have to apply for a permit just like everyone else. Next is Ford Theater. So you can go early in the morning to Ford Theater and ask for tickets for later in the day. You can also order tickets and pay a few dollars online to know what your time is going to be, or you can get free tickets by going in the morning and seeing. I believe doing it the $2.50 to $3 is the best way to go, and it's possible that they've even changed it to like all the tickets cost that much, but definitely worth it. There's a museum underneath where you can learn a lot about Lincoln, learn a lot about the theater, John Wilkes Booth, and then you can go into the theater area. You can see where Lincoln, the box where Lincoln was shot. You can sit in the seats at the theater, so it's a neat experience to go there. Across the street is the Peterson House, where they rushed Lincoln after he had gotten shot, and you can also tour that as well. This is the outside of Ford Theater. And then you can check out the Portrait Gallery, which is a Smithsonian. So it is a free place to visit and see some pretty famous portraits, including portraits of our presidents. So this is the first part of the DC trip. The next one will go further south into the National Mall area. Thank you. See you next.